What's going on, everybody, and welcome all in for another episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'm Zach Farmer, and this is the last preview episode of the preseason. We are 1 week away from the start of the college basketball season, the official start of the college basketball season, with games beginning on November 4th in just 7 days. So this is the final countdown. This is where we finally get to see these teams play. We're already starting to see some of that. Both Gonzaga and Oregon State played a couple of exhibitions over the course of the weekend. So there is a box score to look at, something to kind of to bite on and chew on and think about what that might mean for the coming season. And of course, the three teams I'll be previewing today, the last three: Gonzaga, Portland, and Pepperdine. So I'm going to be including some of what we saw from the exhibition from Gonzaga into that preview that I'll be putting out today. We'll talk about later on. And there was another thing that came out in the last week that we'd also need to kind of have a little bit of a discussion about and review. And that is the report that John Canzanos put out about Grand Canyon being a no-show at the WCC Executive Cabinet meeting last week. This is one where all of the future participant members for next season were to attend, so that would have included Seattle U, Washington State, Oregon State, and Gonzaga. And Grand Canyon was their athletic director, Jamie Boggs, a no-show. GCU president, Brian Mueller, who was supposed to be on a Zoom call with the other league presidents, was also a no-show. And there are also additional reports saying that Grand Canyon has received an offer from the Mountain West. And so obviously this would lead many to believe that this is a sign that Grand Canyon may indeed jump ship from the WCC to the Mountain West before they ever play a game in the WCC. Now, I'll try to get some clarity and some confirmation on what exactly does this mean. Like, let's say they decide tomorrow that they're leaving for the Mountain West. Does that mean that Grand Canyon will not play as part of the WCC next season, and they'll just jump to the Mountain West? I do not know that confirmation as of right now, so we'll try to figure that out. But in the meantime, what we do know is that this announcement came just months after that Grand Canyon University announced that they would be leaving the WAC to head to the WCC. But of course, what we also know is that in the meantime, that Gonzaga has announced their departure to the Pac-12. And of course, in the wake of that, we also started to see rumors about preliminary talks from the Pac-12 with St. Mary's and with Grand Canyon. So it's not like that hearing that they might have a plan in place to go elsewhere is a surprise. Just in the way it's come about might be the little bit of the not distressing part, but concerning part if you are someone who's involved with the WCC. Because regardless of what many people think about Grand Canyon on the academic side, there is something to be said about their competitiveness and their value on the basketball front. Because let's be honest, like, they have been one of the better mid-major programs over the last few seasons. There is money that's poured into that program. They are developing a consistency as far as their success rate, obviously having been to the tournament each of the last couple of years. But they're also trying to figure out how they move up, because it's very obvious that they've outgrown the WAC, that as they have grown in their program status, that is a conference that they have kind of surpassed and they need to upgrade. And of course, the WCC was going to be part of that. Now there's conversations, obviously, that the Mountain West is involved. The report that John Canzano put out also talked about the framework of that Mountain West deal. The GCU would be paying a $3.5 million entry fee to the Mountain West, and that the Lopes would get a guaranteed $1.5 million media rights distribution over the next 6 years. So that is part of what has been put out there for GCU and the Mountain West deal. the one thing I keep thinking about, and now this is obviously like there's so much to be said about what the future ESPN deal, TV deal, media rights deal is going to be, not only for the Mountain West, but also for the WCC. And that was something that Stu Jackson talked about in the interview that I had with him just last 2 weeks ago at Media Day. And yes, the number is going to move without Gonzaga. What that looks like moving forward is going to be tough to say. And of course, I think the math changes without Grand Canyon being a part of that as well. Because I'm sure that like a conference that was headlined by St. Mary's and Grand Canyon is going to be a lot more attractive than one that's going to be headlined by St. Mary's and either USF or Santa Clara. And so it is distressing of what the WCC's media rights deal might look like in a couple of years, sans Washington State, Oregon State, and Gonzaga. And now it sounds like even possibly Grand Canyon. Now, on a competitive front, I will say this. I don't know in the future states of either of those leagues, there's a ton of difference between the Mountain West and the WCC. Because looking forward in 2 years, when Gonzaga and the two Pac-12 schools bolt, when Seattle comes in, when on the Mountain West side, you have the likes of Utah State, Boise State, Colorado State, Fresno State, and San Diego State all head to the Pac-12 as well. What is left are two leagues that, honestly, like both leagues are going to be in a world of hurt. But it's not like I feel like that the top of the league is that all that dissimilar from each other. So looking at the KenPom numbers, let's, as of today, of what they look like. Your top three teams, actually, even let me go a step further. I'm going to go to your top 5 teams in the WCC versus the top 5 teams in the Mountain West, not counting Grand Canyon, but also including the teams that both leagues will have picked up by that stage. So that for the WCC, that does include Seattle. For the Mountain West, that would include UTEP. And then I did kind of a comparison of what this would look like with or without NIU and Toledo, which are also two other schools that have been rumored to be part of this deal. So the top 5 are KenPom numbers for the Mountain West schools are 62, 73, 94, 171, and 198. That is the top 5 schools of the remaining teams that will still be in that league. So 198 is that highest, that lowest number. For the WCC, it's 34, 85, 95, 119, and 131. So the top tier of the WCC is still better than the top tier of the Mountain West. And again, like you are going to have to take some level of a factor into what does not having Gonzaga, how does not having Gonzaga impact those numbers? And for the Mountain West, how does not having 5 of those teams, those 5 teams, especially considering 4 of them were tournament teams a year ago, impact what those numbers look like as well, all in a negative fashion. And while, yes, like I'll fully admit, the bottom of the WCC is really what drags this down. The overall number, I think, is like average is 152 for the Mountain West. The average is 172 for the WCC. That's largely because those bottom 4 teams in the WCC are 232, 274, 287, 295. Like the bottom 4 teams of the WCC are lower than any of the remaining Mountain West teams, which there is going to be that balance, because I do feel like that you look over at the WCC and a top tier league that includes St. Mary's, Grand Canyon, USF Santa Clara, to me sounds better than a Grand Canyon, New Mexico, UNLV, and Nevada. Like to me, that the WCC version of it sounds better. But there's still a lot of things that still have to happen for this to become real, for it to come to fruition. Now, Grand Canyon might look at it like, yes, the college markets of those cities are better. Like you look at Reno, Las Cruces, you look at Albuquerque, not Las Cruces, Albuquerque. You look at Vegas. Like there are better college markets in those spots than maybe say San Francisco, Moraga, L.A., Malibu, Portland, Seattle. But those are also those are major markets, TV markets. And while usually college has such a very small component of that TV revenue and TV market, there's still opportunity to be said in those regions. So more to come, but we'll see about the Grand Canyon situation. Is if they leave, I don't know where the WCC goes from there, because that league is starting to run out of options on who it could potentially bring in to make that a stronger league, with knowing that Gonzaga is on their way out the door, and St. Mary's has been getting calls from other leagues to possibly see about them as well. All right. So moving on to the two exhibition games, real basketball action that did happen over the course of last weekend, and we'll start with the Oregon State game. Pull up the box score here. So they took on D2 Montana State Billings. Again, one of these exhibitions where you're just trying to like get out there, play somebody that's not yourself, and really just see what you have. So nothing to read too much into this. They did win 83-63. Michael Ratai with 18 and 8, so that's a good sign for him. 8 for 12 from the field. 5 turnovers is a little much, but really balanced game from him. DeMarco Minor with 11 points. So you had Isaiah Sy in the starting lineup for them, 4 for 6 from 3, which I think is a very good sign from what we thought we might see from him this season. Josiah Lake coming off the bench, 7 points. He played 24 minutes. You're starting to see kind of like what this rotation might look like a bit. Again, you're going to see a lot of guys in and out for this Oregon State squad, because there are a lot of new pieces, a lot of guys I think are going to be fighting for roles. Parsafala, also one of those guys. He only played 14 minutes, but 13 points, 4 rebounds, pretty efficient in that time. And this is a team that ended up shooting 49% from the field. They took 25 free throws, so that I think that's another good sign that they're getting to the basket, they're getting to the rim. A little too many turnovers against a D2 team, 18 turnovers, but nitpicking here for a game that doesn't count toward anything, that doesn't mean anything, and it's really just kind of like a pulse check for your own team. That Oregon State does look like they're starting to be a little bit of a personality here, and you're starting to see what that rotation might look like. And then the same is going to be for Gonzaga. Now, there are going to be some who might be concerned over the fact that they lost to USC in their charity exhibition over the weekend, 96-93. So high scoring affair between these two squads. Gonzaga had 17 turnovers, which obviously is not going. Actually, 17 turnovers. Looking at the wrong thing. That was points off turnovers. Excuse me, 17 points off, which is a good thing for Gonzaga. 11 turnovers on the game, so that actually is a good number for Gonzaga, about where they kind of want to be. The big men did have a little bit of trouble throughout the course of this game. Graham Ike did have picked up 5 fouls in this one. He was 3 for 10 from the field, so he struggled a bit. Ben Gregg was 1 for 5 from the field, so that was also kind of a little rough for him. But Braden Huff, 12 points, but he also picked up a number of fouls. Refs were whistle happy in this one. Between the two teams, there were 52 fouls called, so this was a not great night, I would say, for the refs. Each team took 33 free throws. So this is not going to, I don't think that's necessarily a sign of what you might see. That's just a lot of free throws for both teams. But the one thing that was nice to see is that early in this contest, you saw Khalif Battle really show out in this one. In 28 minutes, he had 20 points. He He was 4 for 8 from 3. He got to the line 4 for 4 from there. So really good things out of that. And also, interesting note, again, I don't know if it's anything to read into it. They were running through a bunch of rotations, Gonzaga was. But Khalif Battle started over Nolan Hickman. And I don't know if that means that that's what we're going to see moving forward. But but Hickman also played 28 minutes, same as Battle. He had 12 points, 4 for 6 from the field. He was pretty efficient in his own right. So I think that's also a good sign that maybe this is a pairing that we're going to see off and on, but still get their minutes. Michael Ajayi, another one of the additions, 13 points in that starting lineup, 5 for 9 from the field, 6 rebounds, which was second on the team behind Braden Huff, who had 9. So you had a good balance in this one from Gonzaga. You saw some different rotations. Looking just like through the minutes, I didn't get to watch this one, but it's like Dusty Stromer 14 minutes. You saw Emmanuel Innocente with 5 minutes, Diagne with 3. Yo had just about 4 minutes in this contest. So you're starting to see at least like the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys who are solidly in that rotation. And as Mark View talked about last week at Media Day, that there is a strong group of at least 10, 11 guys deep, that this is going to be competitive throughout the course of the year. So what we saw against USC may not be the final rotation. It may not be even all the guys that are going to get more minutes and whatnot. But this was just a first sign of this team is going to be able to score with anybody. I mean, this dropping 93 in an exhibition, the first time out, shooting 46% from there, 40% from 3 is a good sign for Gonzaga. Also, like the fact that they started off slow in this one. They were 36% from the field in the first half, but ended up being 54% in the second. So they clearly like started playing a more efficient basketball in that second half of this one. But a long way to go, but I think these show some positive signs, even though they did pick up a loss, a meaningless loss, one that doesn't count, and one that they're going to learn from and be able to kind of make adjustments as they get into the real games next week. And speaking of, all right, and actually, I said speaking of Gonzaga, I'm not going to start with Gonzaga. I'm going to actually start the trio of previews here with Portland. And this trio, this Portland team has a long way to go. And we kind of knew that going into the offseason. This was a team that was 12-21 last season, 5-11 in the WCC. They do return 40% of the minutes from a year ago, which is obviously a little bit of a good sign continuity-wise. There's going to be some familiarity with the system, and there were a lot of new pieces last year coming in. But there are some very obvious things that need to be addressed. This was a team that allowed the second most points per game in the WCC. This was a team that was 8th in offensive rebounding. This was the second lowest scoring team in the league. So while they do have 7 returners, which is going to be good for that continuity front, they have 11 newcomers, 11 freshmen or redshirt freshmen who are going to see minutes this coming year. And I think this is where we have to. These are the things we have to see. It's like that those newcomers need to make an impact, but there's a specific way they have to make that impact. And Shantay Legans talked about it at Media Day, where he talked about the defensive intensity in practice, the ball movement on offense. They have size that can shoot it. Also, just like they needed to get younger so that they could be flexible in some of the roles that they want to have guys play. And there, again, a number of guys who are going to fit into that. Max McKinnon, one of the transfers coming over from Elon, another Australian, as like we've seen Portland actually start to import quite a few Australians over the course of the last few years. McKinnon back-to-back gold medals at the U20s. He was the CAA Freshman of the Year a couple seasons ago. Last season, 12 points per game, 4.8 rebounds, 45% field goal shooter, 36% from three. Good addition for this Pepperdine squad that's going to need some versatility in it. One of the freshmen I'm really excited to kind of see is going to be Austin Rapp. This 6'10" forward can shoot it. He has a good quick shot from the outside. Also coming over from Australia, won back-to-back NBL 1 national championships with the Knox Raiders. During that championship run, 17 points per game, 11 rebounds, 2.7 assists, 2 blocks. And I really liked his touch on the offensive side. I really liked how well he passed the ball out of the high post, but also from the perimeter. And he reminded me a little bit of a former St. Mary's player back in the day, one of the Aussies. He had a bit of the Daniel Kicker style of game, like very good 3-point shooter, can have his back to the basket, but I think he looks like he's going to be a better passer out of there, and this should be exciting for Portland to have someone I think is going to be given a little bit more of a green light early on in his development. And what we see, again, 11 rebounds a game, those 2 blocks a game are things that Portland needs, are things that they needed to address. And at the very least on paper, we're starting to see those items be brought up. Another one of the guys who's going to kind of help that protection around the rim and that rebounding component is another freshman, Todd Jones, 6'9", quick, athletic around the rim. He runs the floor well in transition, good rebounder. It may take him a little bit of time. It did look like on tape that he needs to kind of work on his strength, build that up. As we know, the WCC is a big, big league, and strength is going to be a big component to surviving the gauntlet that the WCC is going to be, especially this year. Micah Balu, another freshman coming in, 6'5" guard. It doesn't appear the most athletic, but he can get to his spot. He's a willing passer, good passer. He has a lot of Tyler Robertson in his game. It doesn't necessarily look the best, but he gets the job done. He can find his spots. He can find his man running the court in the half court offense. This is someone I think that is going to actually fit well with Shantay Legans, based on like this is a Tyler Robertson type player, and we know that Shantay has done well with guys like that. And then another one, Jinab Dubol is another freshman coming in, 6'8" guard forward, really good range, NBA range from 3, good athleticism. He can hit it off the dribbles, so it's nice to actually see he's not just a strictly spot up shooter. So that's a good thing to additionally to have. And again, we're getting some size on this Portland team, and one of the things that Portland struggled with was its lack of size. Like we talked a lot about the fact that they ended up with like 6'8", 6'9", 6'7" centers over the last couple of years because of injuries a lot of the time. But this was a smaller team that struggled to rebound, that struggled to defend the paint, and they're starting to bring in some size that should help to start to solve that problem. But then they also still do need to figure out what they're going to do on the offensive front, because again, talked about second lowest scoring team in the league. You need some shooters. Now, mentioned some of those guys, talked about Max McKinnon, Austin Rapp, whatnot. One of the guys who redshirted last year, who I think is going to help that, Vince Delano, 6'2" guard, redshirted last year, good off the ball scorer. I think this is going to be a really helpful component for this squad as they look to try to like balance out of like who's going to be your distributors and who's going to be guys who can cut to the basket, find easy buckets for the squad, because this is a team that's going to have to find creative ways to get some offense against not to say that the WCC has a ton of good defensive teams, but they have enough solid defensive teams that you are going to need to find creative ways to beat these squads. at least one of the guys who's coming back who's going to help them on the returning front. Vukasin Macic of 12.5 points per game last year, 40% from three. So one of the few guys last year who was kind of that consistent offensive option for Portland. They did lose, obviously, a few of those other guys. Tyler Harris, Wanzi Gorcito, Tyler Robertson are all out the door. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity to see who is going to be stepping into a lot of these roles. Even though you do have a couple of returners, they're going to hopefully help that. One of the other returners, Bull Dengdit, who also has some Australian ties as well amongst a bunch of the other players, McKinnon, Rapp. This is someone who played 32 games a year ago, 6.4 points per game, 4.8 rebounds, 21 minutes a game. I think you'd expect to see him get a few more minutes for him as he continues to develop, as he continues to find his role with this squad. This is a Portland team that will be having an uphill climb throughout the course of the non-conference. Now, I think that there's some good opportunities in their non-conference schedule. I think once they're going to have some battles there, because by the time they get to conference play is going to be their toughest stretch of the season. Like, unlike some of the other WCC teams, Gonzaga, St. Mary's, San Francisco, Santa Clara, who have loaded up their non-conference, this is a team who has one or two good non-conference opportunities, but really the gauntlet is once they get into WCC play. They will be at Oregon on November 12th. They're at Long Beach State on the 16th. They're at Kent State, which obviously is another solid mid-major program. But then you really start to look down their schedule. They're going to open up WCC play with Washington State and Oregon State in a back-to-back. So one will be in Washington State in Portland, and then they'll head down to Corvallis to take on Oregon State. And then right after that, it's like they have Gonzaga, St. Mary's, USF. It's like the first 5 games are looking very similar to, like, liking it to what San Diego had to do last year in its first 5 games, which was very similar. Gonzaga twice, St. Mary's, Santa Clara, USF. They had to roll through them all right away. So it's important that Portland almost gets going early and gets its rhythm and gets some level of confidence before they get the WCC play, because that first 5 games to me just looks like it looks really rough to start off with those 5 out the gate. And with the two newbies, Washington State, Oregon State, coming in, who are, I would say at that point, are going to be playing pretty confidently. Gonzaga, St. Mary's, USF, we know what they're about. We know what they're doing. Now, San Francisco has been the odd one that Portland somehow has played pretty well over the last few years. So I'm not saying that USF is necessarily that's an automatic for them, but that's a team that by the time we get to January, especially it being in San Francisco and on the hilltop, that is just going to be a tough road game, tough kind of rounding out of that stretch for the Pilots. So as I think about totality of what this Portland team is going to look like, I think there's some opportunities that we start to see some young guys flourish, some young guys play well. I'm really looking forward to see Austin Rapp on that front. I think seeing some of the tape on Jinub Dubol was really interesting to me to see kind of what he's capable of doing. He's another guy that I'd like to really see more of what he's capable of doing. But the challenge for Portland is going to be, as they develop players, as they kind of find these diamonds in the rough, and they kind of did last year with Tyler Harris, is once you develop them, can you keep them around? Can you keep this rolling in the right direction? Portland has struggled the last few years. Portland is trying to get back to pointed in the right direction, get out of that bottom tier of the WCC. They've kind of been on that borderline of it the last 2 seasons. And I don't necessarily think that's going to change going into this year. I would pick them to finish 8th. I think that's right where they are, which is also where the coaches had them going into the season. I think the hill is a little too tough to climb with the 7 teams that are ahead of them in this race. I think a lot of the others have picked up solidified talent or have picked up tough enough talent, experienced enough talent that is going to lend them well. A lot of those teams are veteran teams, and Portland is going to be a far younger, much more inexperienced team than most of the others in the WCC. And that youth, that inexperience, while I think it's going to shine through at times in good ways, it's going to be one of the tougher things to deal with as they get deeper in conference play, as the veteran teams, the bigger teams, the stronger teams start to position themselves for the WCC tournament. So Portland, I think they're going to finish. I think the 8th spot is about right. I think really their window is like that 8, 9, 10. That's about, I think, where Portland's going to end up. But they're good enough to take care of Pepperdine, to take care of to do well against Pacific, to do well against San Diego. I think they have the potential to steal. They could steal one from maybe say LMU or even Oregon State. But this is going to be another building year for Portland, and it really is thinking about the growth of this year, but then also how you keep guys around for the following year and the following year. All right. So I'm going to transition back to the Gonzaga Bulldogs. And with a quick review of what we saw last year. So this was a team that went 27-8, 14-2 in the WCC, which was second, 9th straight Sweet 16. And this was a roller coaster of a season because a lot of people thought this was a down year for the Zags. And this was a team that lost Alex Tui late in the summer as he decided to stay in Australia. They lost Steele Venters in that last week before the season started to an ACL tear. Depth became a problem, especially at the guard position as they entered the season. And as the non-conference started, they were picking up good wins, but they weren't picking up the great win. They beat Syracuse in the Maui Invitational. They beat UCLA, which didn't age well. They beat USC, which didn't age well. They lost to UConn. They lost to San Diego State. They lost to Purdue. Almost all 3 of those could be understandable. But they lost to Washington too, which seemed so out of left field that it almost threw everyone into a panic of what is happening to this Gonzaga team. They entered WCC play. They started to play a little bit better, but they hadn't really played the tougher part of the WCC schedule yet. And they were on the ropes against USF, but were able to pull that out. But then they lost to Santa Clara. And it really started to, by 1, yes, like it was only by 1, but at that point, it almost seemed for many that the sky was falling. This was a team that was only 7 players deep. There was a lot of pressure being put on players who were not quite ready for that stage. There were maybe some unfair expectations being placed on those guys, and like Dusty Stromer kind of first and foremost on that list of guys who you could see the talent, but he was being thrust into a role that wasn't supposed to be his last season. And then the talk started, like, could this be the team that wouldn't make the NCAA tournament? Is this the team that was going to break the streak? And then they won at Kentucky in the middle of February. Ben Gray got inserted into the starting lineup. And that's when it seemed like everything changed. Mind you that and that started a stretch where they went 8. They were 8-2 in WCC play when that Kentucky game happened. So don't want to like oversell the whole idea that like, oh, they lost the Kentucky win really was like a complete turnaround point, they were still playing well. They were still doing all the things, but they weren't winning them in the fashion that we're so used to seeing Gonzaga teams win. They weren't beating all the teams we were used to seeing Gonzaga beat. They lost. They had lost to St. Mary's once in the regular season. They didn't win the WCC regular season title. They lost to St. Mary's in the WCC championship game. But all that said, they earned a 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. They beat McNeese, who everyone was picking as the 5-12 upset. They beat Kansas, a beat-up, battered Kansas team. They reached their 9th straight Sweet 16 before they finally lost to Zach Edey's Purdue team again. So what was considered a, quote, down year, they ended up right back where we're used to seeing them by the end. They were in the Sweet 16. 9 straight years. And that accomplishment alone, you cannot minimize how difficult that is. No one else is doing that. There's very few who have even done. I think I need to go back to see if anyone's actually ever had that long of a streak of reaching the Sweet 16. This is unique. What they're accomplishing right now in this run is special. And going into this year, I think I'd be very hard pressed to not think that they're going to be right back in that second weekend and reach their 10th straight Sweet 16 and then advance even further. So as we know going into this year, high expectations, even though you do lose Anton Watson, who is one of, if not the best defender in Gonzaga history. 4 of the 5 starters come back. Graham Ike, Ryan Nembhard, Nolan Hickman, Ben Gray. All of them return. 3 of them were picked to be on the All WCC preseason team. Ike, Nembhard, Hickman are all on that squad. You bring back Braden Huff, one of the better young players that Gonzaga has. Like Braden Huff, was great off the bench in a lot of moments, great offensively, still a work in progress on the defensive end, but he got better as the season went along. Dusty Stromer comes back, and he's going to be slotted into a role that I think is going to be a little bit more comfortable for him going into this season. He's not going to be asked to do nearly as much as he was a year ago. So you have that core group of 6 returners who played significant minutes a year ago. But now I'm going to add. Gonzaga added Michael Ajayi who transferred over from Pepperdine. I think we were still in the NCAA tournament when that was announced. I think I was still in Spokane when it was announced. I hadn't even gotten out of the first round of the tournament by the time his name was called to be joining Gonzaga. This was a guy who led the WCC in scoring a year ago, 19 a game. This was someone who was second in rebounding at 9.9 a game. This is someone who shoots it well, is going to be a good wing player for this squad, and someone who gives them another offensive option to a team that already has a ton of them. You bring in the Arkansas transfer Khalif Battle, who has been one of the more talked about transfers coming in this offseason, because this is someone who is, again, you talk about someone who can score. This is another person who gets buckets. Last season, he was averaging 14.8 points in 25, just short of 25 minutes a game. But in those last 7 games for the Razorbacks, he was averaging 29 points a game, 6 rebounds a game. This is someone who just gets points. He was 33rd in the NCAA in free throw attempts last year. He scored 20 plus points 12 times last season. So this is going to be someone who we'll see about what his role is actually going to be. Initially, I think many people thought 6-man, can be first off the bench. I don't know if I want to read too much into the fact that he started in the exhibition game instead of Nolan Hickman, but he is, no matter what scenario it is, he's going to provide that extra guard, that extra relief, so that it takes some of the pressure off of Nolan Hickman, Ryan Nembhard, because those two played a ton of minutes last season. Hickman led the WC. The two of those were both averaging 35 minutes a game, and I know I had concern over their durability over the course of the season because they were playing heavy, stressful minutes in a lot of those contests. And having someone like Khalif Battle in there, having someone like Michael Ajayi in there is going to relieve some of that for those two guys. So those two being huge pickups in and of themselves. Now, so one that I think is a piece that talk about offense. Well, you still need to address the defense, because that was something that Gonzaga wasn't the best at a year ago. And the early KenPom numbers don't lend them to think that they're going to be, they're not a bad defensive team, but they're not a great defensive team. I think they had him at 46 in the defensive KenPom number for the preseason. But you needed some defense. I mean, bottom line, you needed someone who is also going to be kind of a lockdown defender, someone who's looked at as being a problem on the defensive end of the floor. And that was what Emmanuel Innocenti brought in from Tarleton State. This was coming in as a sophomore. He was all defensive team on the all freshman squad a year ago. He ranked fourth in the league amongst all freshmen in the nation. Sorry, I looked at this stat wrong. Amongst all freshmen in the nation, he ranked fourth in defensive rebounds per game, eighth in steals, ninth in overall rebounds. This is someone who is going to give them that wrinkle that they really don't have anywhere else. And I think something to be said about someone like that. You need someone who's going to be a little bit more of a glue guy, much more like a Ben Gregg and what he has been over the course of his time at Gonzaga. You need someone who's going to do a lot of the dirty work. You need someone who's going to step in to do those things. And he is someone who can step in to do those things, even if it's in short spurts or in limited minutes or whatnot throughout the course of a game. Because this team, you look at up and down, there's offense everywhere. Graham Ike, someone who's capable of scoring 20 a game. Ryan Nembhard is capable of scoring 20 a game. Ajayi is capable of scoring 20 a game. Battle is capable of doing it. Nolan Hickman could give you 15 plus a game. You put these guys in the right situation, they're all capable of giving you big outings, which is going to make it so difficult to guard this team because you never know where it's going to come from. Again, and then Ben Gregg, Braden Huff, Dusty Stromer, and Sente can just almost fill in the gaps on that front and do a lot of the little things that they need the team to do. Now, I will say that the depth overall doesn't seem to be much of a problem. They have a lot of interchangeable pieces. Ajayi can play multiple positions. Battle can play multiple positions. Sente can play multiple positions. Stromer can play multiple positions. The one I think that's, if there is a concern, it is the depth at the center spot. And because Graham Ike, as we even saw last year, did have the tendency to get into foul trouble, which forced Braden Huff into more minutes, which forced him into some situations where he was taken advantage of on the defensive end. And getting to him, again, it's not a bad thing because, again, he's going to also give you something on the offensive side of the ball. So it's not like you lose a ton on that side. But what you are doing is you're putting more pressure on the fact that Ike may not always. No, when Ike's in, he's one of the best big men in the country. When he's in, if he can stay on the floor, that helps Gonzaga really stretch out games and really kind of make sure that their depth is at that spot, at that position, isn't as glaring. But if he gets into foul trouble and then you have to go to Braden Huff, he also could potentially get into foul trouble, even again, using that USC game as an example of what could happen. both of them got into foul trouble. And that is a challenge that Gonzaga is going to have to face and deal with as they face maybe some larger teams over the course of the non-conference and then also throughout conference play, because look at, especially staring at St. Mary's, Santa Clara, Washington State, and even USF to an extent, you have some big teams that you're going to have to deal with, and this is something that if I'm going to point at something that Gonzaga might have a weakness in, that is going to be it going into this season. Now, thinking about this non-conference, Gonzaga going into this year, was obviously ranked top 10 in number of polls. I think it was like number 7 in the AP, number 6 in the coaches, and it's earned, it's warranted. And their non-conference kind of matches it. Their non-conference, they're going to start out with Baylor on Monday night at Spokane Arena. They have Arizona State. They're going to be at San Diego State. They head to the Battle for Atlantis, where they'll see West Virginia. Then they'll play either Indiana or Louisville. They have Kentucky for the Battle in Seattle. They're going to be playing UConn at Madison Square Garden. They're going to be playing UCLA at the Intuit Dome. There was a ton of opportunity for this Gonzaga team in the non-conference to really kind of take a hold of even a top 5 ranking if they are able to get the right wins and really kind of establish themselves as that team going into conference play. Because I do think going into the conference play, I think there is a separation between them and everybody else. Again, while I do think that St. Mary's is still going to be in the mix, St. Mary's is still a tournament team. The additions that Gonzaga made, I think, makes it that much more challenging to try to limit them and what they're going to do. Even St. Mary's, as good as they are defensively, and they're still going to be one of the better defensive teams in the country, this is the number of weapons that Gonzaga has just makes it difficult. And yeah, sure, they can't have them all out on the floor at the same time. I mean, you can't have 7, 8 guys who all could shoot 40% from 3 on the floor at once, but they're going to spread you out. They're going to make it difficult. And honestly, it does feel like at times like it might be better off for Gonzaga to maybe have the 2 big guys off the floor, at least in small spurts, to really stretch teams out so that they can use their speed and their athleticism and that versatility to its fullest potential. Not to say that I think it's going to happen, but I think that would be an interesting thing to see of like, hey, run out a group out there where maybe Ajayi is the center and you roll with, or even Ben Gregg being the center, like just thinking about Gregg, Ajayi, Battle, Hickman, and Nembhard out there at the same time. That is a group that's just going to run and would be really fun to watch and see what that group is able to do together in small spurts. But their non-conference sets themselves up very well for what could be a run to the Final Four, a run back to the national title game. We have seen this in 4-wave spurts. They got to the title game in 2017. They got to the title game in 2021. 4 years later, 2025, this coming March Madness, this coming tournament, can they get back to where they were, and can they finish the job that has eluded them for so long throughout the course of this run that Gonzaga has had under Mark Few? Now, I think that this is a Gonzaga team that is going to win the WCC. I don't think that means necessarily that they're going to have a clean slate. I think that they could end up dropping one of those games to either to St. Mary's, to Santa Clara, or even to say Washington State. I think it's possible for that to happen, as that is going to start to become a budding rivalry as they are going to move together to the Pac-12 as well. And also, I'm just staring at that last 4 games for Gonzaga going into the WCC tournament, where they're going to have 3 of their last 4 on the road, and it's at Washington State, then they're home for St. Mary's, then at Santa Clara, at USF. So it's very similar to the stretch that they had last season at the very end, a stretch in which they did actually clean sweep the St. Mary's, Santa Clara, and USF. But it's a stretch in which they were also playing at their best. I think that was that was for Gonzaga. They started playing well toward the end of the season. They were starting to play well into February. They started to play well into March, and that was when they really hit their stride. Now, I think a large part of that was because they were still trying to figure out that rotation and what that was going to look like. And at least going into this year, that seems much more solidified that they can hit the ground running going into this year. And they're going to be able to play better and play well against a lot of those good teams right away, where I just don't think they're ready to do that in November, December a year ago. And they'll be much more prepared and ready for it this year. So for this Gonzaga team, bottom line, I think they are the favorite to win the WCC regular season title. I think they are at the very least back to the Sweet 16 for the 10th straight year. But after that, it's always tough because expectations are difficult. Expectations can get away from how difficult this is, because this Gonzaga squad, as good as it is, all it takes is one bad game for it to all end in March. And we've seen it to any number of great teams in March that lose somehow early in the tournament, earlier than we all thought they would. And so going into this year, I don't want to say like the expectation should be Final Four. The expectation should be X, Y, or Z. I think that they are capable of getting back to the title game. I think they are capable of reaching the second weekend. I think that's almost like the bottom line. If there is an expectation, that's my bottom line expectation. Back to the Sweet 16. After that, all bets are off because of matchups, because of March. Things happen in that month that you wouldn't anticipate happening any other time. So this Gonzaga squad looks the part. It is going to play the part and is going to be one of the tougher outs once we get to March Madness and to the NCAA tournament. All right. And I'm going to go from one end of my WCC standings to the other end of the WCC standings, and that's Pepperdine. Pepperdine goes into this year on full reset mode. They were 13-20 last year, 5-11 in the WCC. They let go of head coach Lorenzo Romar, and after his departure, it was a mass exodus from the roster. Only 2 players do return, 14 newcomers for this Pepperdine squad, with head coach Ed Schilling, which is his first year at the helm. He had 13 years as an assistant at UMass, Memphis, UCLA, Indiana, and he was at Grand Canyon the last few years, helping them actually reach the NCAA tournament for the first time. And obviously they reached in back-to-back seasons and then beat St. Mary's last season to pick up their first NCAA tournament win. They were the WAC conference champions the last couple of years. He's had a ton of, among the stops, again, talk about Indiana, UCLA. While he was at UCLA, they made 3 Sweet 16 appearances in 14, 15, and 17. A ton of experience also just with NBA level players. He sent 9 players to the NBA while he was at UCLA. So there's some optimism with Pepperdine and where this direction is going to go, really talking on the development front. Because if you're talking about schools like Pepperdine or San Diego or Portland, like, it is really about developing the young pieces that are going to be able to fit into this system as you try to rebuild what this program is going to look like moving forward. And it's program building for this spot, for Pepperdine, for Ed Schilling right now. And he does bring in a good some pieces that I do like. First and foremost was bringing in Mo Odom, who was at Pacific a year ago. One of the better point guards in the league. 4.6 assists, which was third in the WCC. 2.5 was his assist to turnover ratio, which is also third in the WCC. 8.7 points per game. I really like him as being that table setter, being that guy who's going to run the offense. They also brought in a number of wing players who are going, I think, have great opportunity to do a lot of to get some chances, because I think a number of these guys just have not had that opportunity in recent years. So Aaron Clark, one of those guys coming over from Wake Forest, former 4-star recruit, was ranked 91 nationally by Rivals and 102 on three. He only played 7 games last season, but just looking on tape, good shooter. This is someone who's going to help them on the offensive end. So only a sophomore, so someone who can grow into this program. Javon Cooley coming over from Marist, another guy who is going to, I think, help them a lot. Shot 54% from the field last season, 47% from three. He was ranked second in the MAC in three-point percentage. Coming in as a grad transfer, so this is someone who is experienced on the college basketball level, someone who's going to be able to kind of teach these younger players how to actually get it done at the collegiate level and on a consistent basis. Zion Bethea is another interesting piece. He had limited action last season at Delaware, but the season before, he was part of the last team at St. Francis Brooklyn, which disbanded their athletic department after the season. He played 28 games, averaged 10 points per game, a little over a steal a game, 42% from three, so another good shooter that Ed Schilling is bringing in for this team. Another familiar face to WCC people is going to be Stefan Todorovic, who's coming over from USF. And he got limited playing time while he was with the Dons, 22 games. He averaged only 3.8 points per game. But this is another shooter, another wing player that they're going to be able to kind of mix and match and use his versatility to really, I think, stretch this lineup out and give them some options. He did score a season high of 17 points last year, so this is someone who can get you a bucket and could be one of those options. An interesting piece I saw as I was looking through the roster and everything else is Taj Auduk. This is someone, 6'3" freshman guard out of Canada, who is one of the top point guards in his class. 24 points per game in his senior year, 6.4 assists, 5.9 rebounds. This is someone who scored 52 in his senior night. Also, he played for Canada's U16 squad. He was on the 2021 FIBA Americas Championship and helped Team Canada to a third-place finish. So someone who's played at a higher level, someone who is capable of really giving you different looks. And I think, like, between the number of guards I've kind of started to throw out there, they have options. And I think that's something that Pepperdine just needs right now. Options. What are you going to look like moving forward? Which pieces fit where? And it's going to be trial by fire, I think, a lot for the Waves going into the non-conference. But one of the two pieces that did come back that should at least, like, that is going to give them some level of stability is Boubacar Coulibaly, the former USC transfer who has been at Pepperdine for the last couple seasons. 6'10" forward, redshirt senior. He only got to get in 11 games last season before he went down with an injury, but he was averaging 8.5 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, shooting nearly 60% from the field. Also was leading the team in blocks at 1.7 per game for a Pepperdine team that was not a good defensive team. And this was the one guy who gave them something on that end, who gave them a different look, someone who could actually protect the rim, because nobody else on that Pepperdine team was able to do it last year. So the fact that they at least have one guy on this squad who's going to be able to do that is incredibly helpful. The other thing is that this is just scrolling through this roster, this is not a very big team. Like, this is going to be a fairly small team, like not a huge number of guys. Like just scrolling through, there's only like 2 or 3 guys who are going to be, or 3 players above 6'9" or 6'9" and above. So it's going to be a team that's, I think, going to struggle on the rebounding front. I think it's a team that's going to struggle on the protecting the rim most of the time. But I think this is going to be a team that's going to have more cohesive options than maybe they did a year ago. They had so much talent a year ago, and I think we talked about how much those having the talent but not picking up the wins, not seeing it all be put together was frustrating with Pepperdine a year ago. Seeing Houston Millette, seeing Javon Porter, seeing Niles Cooper, seeing just these great talented players for Pepperdine, but not be able to put it together and get wins. It was mind-boggling, frustrating, whatever you want to say. It's somehow they didn't work together. Somehow the pieces didn't quite fit. And I think that is now the goal. It's like maybe you're going to have guys that aren't quite as talented, at least in the early going, but maybe they're going to be more cohesive. Maybe these are pieces that are going to work better together to be able to kind of help this team out. And in the non-conference, like they're going to have plenty of opportunity to just kind of get their feet on the ground, get some momentum going. The two big ones that really are kind of like on their schedule, it's like you look at it, it's like they're at UNLV, at Northwestern. New Mexico State will be an interesting one, but then like really a lot of like Big West teams that they should be capable of competing with and beating. And then they dive in the WCC play, and this is a team I just do not see ready to take on that challenge. I think this is the team that's going to finish last in the WCC, which was also what the coaches said. And it really is just about getting better and growing as a team this season. Figuring out what the system is, what the personality is, what is that signature going to be for the Waves moving forward under Ed Schilling? What are the goals going forward? Because that right now, it's obviously not winning a conference. It's obviously not finishing top half of the league. You got to start somewhere. Much like Pacific, like Pacific and Pepperdine are in a very similar situation where they're just trying to piece it back together and gain some level of confidence, legitimacy, that they can point this thing in the right direction and that we are going to see good things from these programs moving forward. And as of right now, I think this is the team that was hurt by the portal the most. And it was also the team that I don't think was able to capitalize on the portal, or it's the team that was able to capitalize on the portal the least in the offseason, them and San Diego. And it is why I have both San Diego and Pepperdine there at the bottom together. So with a lot of young players, a lot of youth, new system, and a program that needs to just kind of turn it in the right direction, this might be the big rough patch right in this first season. But if they can figure out how to turn it around and gain some level of momentum and hold on to some of the pieces that work, this is a Pepperdine program that we know can bring in talent when we know they can bring in talent. We've seen it over the years. It's a matter of, can they put it all together and actually get some wins out of this group for a program and an athletic department that is trying to that is doing some big things on campus and is trying to point this thing in the positive way. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. All of the previews are now on the YouTube channel, so go out and check out all of those. So that for all 11 teams are up. I will have the final predictions and everything else episode coming out later this week. So that is 2 episodes this week. All of the previews are up. We are 1 week away from the start of the college basketball season. Monday, November 4th, it is finally here. And that opening slate is going to be a doozy. We're going to talk about that next week. And the highlight of that opening night, as we all know, is going to be Baylor against Gonzaga at Spokane Arena. And so we're kicking it off in a big, big way on Monday night. So it's going to be fun. And so that preview episode will be coming out next week. And it's here. The wait is over. College basketball has arrived. Thanks all for hopping on, watching this episode. Again, we'll be back later this week. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you later.